Joining me today for the interview is Dr. Tina Boogren. Tina is a fierce advocate for educators, particularly for their well-being. She is an author of numerous books centered around her passion areas of quality instruction, coaching, mentoring, and wellness. Tina is also a co-director of Solution Tree's Wellness Solutions for Educators and is also the host of the weekly podcast Selfcare for Educators with Dr. Tina Boogren. And that is exactly why I've invited Tina here today. So Tina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I am so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Certainly great to meet you. You and I run in the same circles, but we have not met one another before. And I always look forward to having you on the podcast and excited for our conversation because obviously, teacher wellness and self-care is an important topic and one that certainly acutely has become even more important. So as we know, the intensity of the pandemic and the relentless stress that educators have been under has brought self-care for educators to the forefront, right? It's
Yeah,
always been there,
yeah,
but it's something now that it's been really important.
yeah.
But so many educators, Tina, feel immediately guilty when they
Yes.
focus on themselves and not their students. So what do you do, or what do you say to educators to get them out of that mindset, that idea that they feel guilty about focusing on themselves?
Right. I know. The minute you said it, my heart was like, I know. It's there a couple really interesting things along those lines. So last year there was research, 2020 research that came out and said that the two most stressful occupations are nurses and teachers. And it makes perfect sense. We're the caregivers, right? And we signed up for this profession in order to do that, to take care of everyone else. And so we get to a place where we're kind of the last person on the to-do list. And so really for me, really the core of self-care is shifting that exact mindset of recognizing that by caring for ourselves, we are actually caring for our students. And that's a hard shift, I know. Oh, there's a feeling of, yeah, I'll take care of myself once I've checked in and made sure that everyone else is okay. Not just my students, but my family, like my colleagues, all of it. And the true idea of self care is the notion that, and I know it's become trite now, but it's so perfect. The airline announcement of securing your own oxygen mask before you assist others is the absolute truth. My core value and the hill that I die on is the belief that if we take exquisite care of the adults in the building, meaning that adults are given permission to take care of themselves, then we will in turn take exquisite care of our students, that they go together. One does not mean that we are neglecting the other. So that shift of mindset, it's a hard one, but I think finally we're starting to see we just cannot continue at the pace that we have and expect it to be okay.
It feels a little bit like a short-term, long-term case where, we
Yeah.
might think in the short term if we focus on our students, but long term, we're going to pay a price for that versus the idea if in the short term we look after ourselves, we will be better for our students in long term. Is that the
Yeah.
right way to look at that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I could not agree more. And there's a conversation that I've been having with educators lately is, you know, e especially people that have their own children or nieces, their kids in their lives, their own kids that they send off to school. And if we were to sit down and paint a portrait of that ultimate teacher that we wanna send our own children to, we list that they are excited and they're energized and they love their job and they're inspired and on and on and on. And then if we think about, okay, let's compare how are we feeling right now? And we are totally depleted and worn out and exhausted. Like what we want for our own children, we're not allowing ourselves to give to students, like that piece of
Mhm.
it. So absolutely recognizing that in order to take care of our students, that taking care of ourselves, it is. I love that. I hadn't thought about it in the term of like short term, long term, but that makes perfect sense to me. Yes.
Yeah, it feels like we're going to burn out. We're not going to be there for our
Yeah.
students, and long term, that's really what it is. Because we know that being an educator, teacher, administrator, district level is a demanding job, and it comes with a lot of stress and pressure. So when I feel stress and pressure, of course, as an educator, I need to be able to recognize the difference between the regular stress and pressure of the job and the need to give more attention to self care. So, what are some signs that educators might recognize in themselves that let them know that this is not just regular stress and pressure of the job. This is actually, I'm starting to recognize that I need self-care. So what are some
Yeah.
of those signs that educators can look for?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Stress itself is not a bad thing, right? That's how we get things done.
Right.
It's the prolonged stress that's really doing a number. And so those signs that you mentioned, I think they're unique for everyone. And
Yeah.
it's a conversation that I have in PD because it starts to be kind of funny of like, when do you know for yourself like things have gone off the rails? So a tiny one for me, um when I start ordering Diet Coke,
Okay.
because this is something that I have just slowly but surely gotten soda, pop, wherever you live, out of my diet,
Yeah.
mainly because I've made a commitment to drink the stupid water. I've been drinking the water. So just yesterday, this is funny, at the airport, I ordered a Diet Coke and I was like, oh boy, Tina, you're tired. You are, you are letting things slip. So there's these certain tells that we know. And
Okay.
that's the small little things. But then that continues down the road. Then we start seeing kind of the universal signs of burnout
Yeah.
where we are not excited to get up and go to the job, where we're pretty negative, where really we're mad, we're angry, we don't feel that passion, the whole world is out to get us, like, and
Mhm.
when we start to then detach from the job too, that again, we're not, the kind of numb emotions, those are all signs of that burnout, compassion fatigue. The
Mhm.
stress has gotten to be too much. And so when we have to be on the lookout for those, because when we recognize them, we have to do something about it. And to me, that's the hardest part, because when we've
Mhm.
reached that place, that kind of burnout, it might be, many people are familiar with Ellen Moore's dip chart, as I call it, which is
Yeah.
that chart that represents the phases of the school year. She created that chart thinking about new teachers. My argument is that we all go through those and we hit usually around this exact time of year where we start to move from survival into disillusionment. And the hardest part of that is when we're there, we don't feel like taking care of ourselves, like because we feel terrible. So that recognition of, number one, recognizing where we are and knowing we're not alone is huge, and saying, okay, what teeny tiny little thing can I do to help myself? Because I am convinced, I have watched it for myself. I've watched it with teachers that I work with, administrators. If we commit to doing just one small little thing, those small things actually add up. And if we start to feel better, then we start to kind of show up differently and we get on a roll. So it's that stress is stress on its own is okay. It's that prolonged stress that is dangerous.
Right. It seems like whenever, having that level of recognition about when I am breaking habits or stepping
Yeah,
outside of what my norms are. You
yeah.
for you it's Diet Coke, for others it might be a cheeseburger. Who knows what it might
Absolutely.
be, right?
I could throw
Yeah.
some chicken McNuggets in there.
There
Yes.
you go. Yeah. Couple extra pints at the airport, who knows, right? This is
Absolutely.
how
Yep.
we break those
Yeah,
habits, right? And
yeah.
being aware of that and
Yes.
recognizing those signs in ourselves that we are, going sideways. But often we don't see that initially, right? We just do
Right.
things sort of slip back into habit. So
Yes.
that's an interesting thing, and just trying to see ourselves almost as a third party, like
Yes.
observing ourselves sort of in action. Now, look. So I know you can't give an exhaustive list of all the things we can do to look after ourselves, because as you say, the list would be long, and everybody is personalized. Everybody's
Yeah.
idiosyncrasies are personal. One size never fits all. Now, having said that, uh, are there some fairly universal strategies that we can employ to proactively keep our lives in balance, physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually? What are some approaches to self-care that you have seen be quite effective for a number of educators or a number of people?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I know. I wish I could be like, yes, here are the 5 things. And if we just do these, and what I have learned, I'm a research nerd about this, having studied this for years now, the most frustrating part is there are no universal strategies. I mean, there are,
Right.
I'll talk about them, but
Yeah.
it's the idea that really different strategies work for different people, which we all know that feeling. It's so frustrating. Someone, a partner, a best friend will try something, do something, and it works for them. And we are like, yes, I'm going to do that. And it doesn't work for us. And then we think there's something wrong with us. And it's not. We're all just wired so differently. Some of us are morning people. Some of us are night owls. There's just so many factors. What the approach that I always say, what's universal is starting with our most basic level needs. You can think of this as the core level of Maslow's hierarchy, which is our physiological needs. Tim Caneld and I in our educator wellness framework talk about that as just our physical wellness. And we say that's the starting place because, and we would break that down into our diet, our movement, and our sleep and rest, those core areas. And the reason why I say to start there, and those are universal, is because in times of stress or crisis or trauma, those are what's typically impacted first and the hardest, even if we have good habits built around those. Mm-hmm. And so when we are particularly stressed or we feel like we're in that disillusionment phase, 99% of the time, you can trace it back to recognize that something's kind of gotten out of whack in diet or exercise or sleep, which is such a common theme. So I always say to kind of go back to basics. I think of this as we have to treat ourselves like puppies. Like if we think about what does a puppy need, right? A puppy needs water and sleep and a walk and food and love and rest, right? If we go back and treat ourselves like puppies in the most kind way, again, then we start to feel better. So that I always say starting with physical wellness, because once we feel better, then it's easier to move into some of these other areas, what we would call like our mental wellness, our emotional wellness, our social wellness. But those are really hard to tackle if we're just exhausted. If we are just consuming only Diet Coke and chicken McNuggets, right? So
right.
those pieces, once we get those really solid, then it's easier to start delving into the other areas as well.
When you said treat ourselves like puppies, it maybe we need a tea towel to play tug of war with in the kitchen for 7 hours, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no. And the other piece it makes me think of as you were talking, you kept using the word feeling, and it reminded me that maybe it's not on what we do, but it's seeking the feeling, right? What makes us feel happy? What makes us feel satisfied? What makes us feel strong? What makes us feel well in all of that? So I think I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Do you agree that seeking the feeling versus seeking the thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the question. I think this comes originally from Danielle Laporte. It's just a simple idea of how do I want to feel today rather than what do I want to get done today.
Right.
And that shift, I love that. How do I want to feel today can really, really make that change. Along those lines, something that I've been playing with in the kind of self-care squad, as I love to call them, is this idea of how can I live my best life today?
Right.
We have this hashtag LYBL, live your best life. And what I've loved is to watch educators take that and run with it. And it's kind of like we're taking back that hashtag, because typically if you just do a Google search and you look for a hashtag LYBL, you see all these pictures of like vacation and umbrella drinks. And I'm here for all of that. But that is so few and far between. That's a very different kind of self-care. That we can't rely on those, twice a year vacations. Instead, if we think about how we want to feel, it's along those same lines. How can I live my best life today? Even in this really hard day, this Monday with back-to-back meetings and demands, what can I do today to feel like, at least for a moment of it, maybe not the entire day, that I have a moment of living my best life? Like, what can that look like today? And I have seen so many amazing examples that it is just, I'm committing to, I'm going to actually eat lunch today. I'm going to go for a walk during my plan time. Like, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to, all those small, I'm going to put on my amazing playlist on the way home and have a dance party in my car. Like, those tiny little moments help us feel better. And that shift is small but mighty.
Yeah, I've certainly been a big believer of that. And listeners, you've heard me talk about that a little bit on the podcast about how our feelings are a window.
Yeah.
They're or even a mirror. They're a reflection of what we've been predominantly thinking and predominantly doing. Our feelings really do tell us whether our habits are on or off track. And of course, we know that new teachers, struggle to maintain themselves in the position for long. We see teachers within the first 5 years leaving the profession, and knowing how important self-care is and knowing that stress in education is unavoidable. When we think about new teachers, what advice would you have for those beginning this career? We probably have several new teachers or early in the career teachers listening to the podcast. So what advice do you have for them to proactively incorporate self-care into their daily or their weekly routines? I think we've talked a
Yeah.
little bit about it, but just what specifically would you say to
Yeah.
new teachers?
Yes. Oh, my heart. So first of all, new teachers, we love you. We need you. Please stay, right? Like,
Right.
yes, you're spot on. I mean, and we lose 50% of new teachers within the first 5 years. There's lots of data that says we lose 40 to 50% within the first 7 years. And that's all pre-pandemic data. We won't know the ramifications of this for a while. So it worries me.
Yeah.
So the way that I tackle this, so I actually wrote a book specifically on this. The book is called The Beginning Teacher's Field Guide, where I took Ellen Moore's phases, and what I did is I matched instructional strategies and self-care strategies to the phases. Now, this is true for everyone, but my lens around new teachers, the advice of write the book that you wish you had. So that was the
Right.
book I wish I would have had as a new teacher. I didn't really think about self-care at all. Like many of us,
Yeah.
I was spinning my wheels. I was spending inordinate amount of time at work. I'm not sure I was actually getting work done, but I was just sitting there trying to figure out what to do.
Mhm.
And so what I did is I broke down, for example, in the anticipation phase, which is the very beginning of the school year, the self-care strategies that I start with are get really clear on your habits around diet, exercise, and sleep. Get some solid habits in place. Then when we start to move into those harder phases, survival, disillusionment, it's strategies, teeny tiny little things, for example, of establishing a gratitude practice.
Mhm.
Because again, if we can find that feeling of gratitude when things are really hard, that can help us stay connected to our why. And I give examples of either writing it down, taking a gratitude photo, sharing gratitude out loud. Altruism is another one. We know from the research, positive psychology research tells us that the fastest way to feel better is to do something nice for someone else. And of course, we have an altruistic job. So
Mhm.
connecting to that, and then maybe we do a 30-day challenge where we commit to doing one act of kindness every single day. And another strategy around survival and disillusionment is humor. And I chose that one because we know humor makes us feel better. Humor makes us connected to others. And it's something that when we're in the hard phases, we forget. Nothing is funny when everything is hard. So if we purposely seek it out. So this is permission to go home and watch an episode of Ted Lasso or
Yeah.
Schitt's Creek, or like to find the humor. Because again, that feeling when we feel better, it just kind of it shakes off some of the hard stuff. And then we just
Right.
kind of have a fresh start, which I love.
You got to find either the humor or the ridiculousness in what you're experiencing at some point, right?
Absolutely.
I could not agree more about the concept of gratitude, because you cannot think in a positive way around gratitude and feel negative. Your thoughts will produce those feelings, and if you focus yourself, I'm a big advocate of that, of
Yeah.
thinking about gratitude, because it, again, as maybe as routine as it might feel for some, and maybe a little bit manufactured, it shifts the way you think, and the way you think produces how you
Yes.
feel, and that feeling is what you're going to carry into the rest of your day, for
Yes.
sure. And it makes, the new teachers, Tina, it also makes me think about, I want to talk about leaders now.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah.
me think that leaders in particular need to pay close attention to the wellness of new teachers. But let's sort of finish up here with leaders, and specifically school principals. When we think about principals sort of working with teachers on a daily basis, how do school leaders cultivate a culture of self-care within their schools, and what can they do, maybe specifically for new teachers, but generally for everyone, to help cultivate that culture of self-care in their schools?
Yeah. I'm worried sick about our leaders.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's like everyone, don't get me wrong, but 3 years of holding this. So Absolutely. Thinking about creating this culture with their staff. And I'm going to argue is probably not the right word. I'm going to make a bold claim that it starts with them modeling this themselves. I
Right.
see, so talk about caregivers. I see, and I mean this with my whole, this is not a judgment. I see so many leaders wanting to provide the gift of a culture and climate of self-care for their staff, but they're not doing it themselves. And we know we have to walk our talk, right?
Hmm.
That notion of integrity is, if we want our staff to take care of ourselves, it starts with us taking care of ourselves. So for leaders, I would say it's the same things, getting back to basics, taking care of yourself. And once you do that, then you're modeling that it is okay for staff to do that as well.
Right.
And really, this goes down to, this is exactly the vision that Tim Caneld and I, as co-directors of the Wellness Solutions for Educators, and our book Educator Wellness, really had this vision of thinking about these 4 dimensions of self-care that we can take a staff through. And it's all lined up that a leader, we're trying to take things off the plate of a leader. A leader could use this to guide their staff through it, where we think about physical wellness, mental, emotional, and social. Within each of those areas, we've got 3 specific routines to think about. So there's lots of directions to go in, but we have a research affirmed framework that really gives us a vision for that. So there's lots of resources out there, but the core piece, I would say, for leaders in particular, is to take care of yourselves first and foremost. I mean, they are hanging on by a string.
Yeah.
We know attrition rates are even greater for leaders than they are for new teachers. And again, I'm worried about what we're going to find as we move through this pandemic too.
Yeah. As you're responding there, I can't help but think about my own experience in my career and thinking about superintendents and principals and teachers,
Yeah.
and trying to send the message of self-care, but then you being at the school and teachers driving past the school on a Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon or Saturday and seeing your vehicle there, or worse, teachers receiving emails from you on a Saturday
Yes.
afternoon
Yes.
or three in the morning on
Yep.
a Monday, and that message of the fact that you're supposed to always be at work. I think superintendents can inadvertently or maybe intentionally send that message to
Yep.
principals that, hey, if you're not at work all weekend, you're not really doing your job. And principals can send that same message to teachers to say, I'm at the school 7 days a week, working. And I just never bought into that. I
Yep.
never was impressed by that. I actually thought, Tina, that if you had to spend all weekend at the school, you were wildly inefficient with your minutes during the
Yeah.
week. I just thought, like, what are you doing? So how is it just a matter of just saying, stop sending 3 a.m. emails, or is there other things that we can do to
Right.
try to stop this kind of frenzy around the relentlessness of the job? What
There
are
is.
us? Yeah.
Well, and I think it's such an interesting, I've been having this conversation with people lately. I think it's part of the nature of education too, is this kind of martyrness
Yeah.
of their I give this funny example, but it's kind of true. Like, teachers will be talking, and one teacher will say, I was at work till 5 o'clock last night. And teacher B
Yeah.
says, well, I was at work till 7. And then someone else says, well, I was at work till
Oh,
9.
yeah.
And it just, we like outdo each other. And I
I
wish
know.
we could change it and be like, no, I left work at 4 o'clock. Yay. That celebration of really turning. I think we've just created this culture. And it stems back to, this is a conversation I had with Anthony Muhammad years ago. We got to kind of laughing about, we were talking about great movies, educator inspirational movies. And we kind of went down the line, and it got to be funny that the educator movies really are, they're horrifying. So
Yeah.
we were talking about the movie Freedom Writers. I love that movie. I was an English teacher, but then we started breaking that down, and we were like, oh, in the end of that, she actually quits her job and gets divorced. And we have held that movie up, right? That this
Mhm.
expectation that we give everything, and if not, we're not a good teacher.
Right.
So part of what we have to, this gets to kind of the systemic, beyond the Band-Aid, drink more water approach of, let's change our culture and climate to not hold that up as that's winning. That's not winning. And figuring out, again, what works for each of us. So something that I talk about in workshops, again, the hard part is there's no universal way, but figuring out what works for you, doing some action research, and then holding true to that. So some people, when I was in the classroom, I stayed on Wednesdays. Wednesdays was my late day, and I just oh, I got everything done, but I walked away the other days, which was hard because there's that look. We give each other the look. Oh, must be nice to leave at 3:00, right? So to stop that and to note everyone's on their own rhythm and pattern. Some people like to work on the weekend. Some people do not. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think if we have to be careful, we're not doing the 24/7, but being really transparent. For example, my email, I don't know if you caught it, the underneath my email, the signature, I say my work hours may not be your work hours. So please don't feel obligated to respond to this outside of work hours, because you and I, we have weird work hours
Right.
because of our lives, right? And so
Yeah.
I try to be really careful about when I send emails. And part of it is helping. I've had workshops with leaders where we just learn how to schedule emails. So maybe you feel better sending the email on Saturday, but we talk about how teachers receive that. So every email program has a way where you can delay sending it. Send it on Monday, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or send a message to your staff that just because I'm sending it, I don't expect you to respond. But I think you're so right that we've done this culture in
Mhm.
our field where it taps into that very first question of feeling guilty if we are not 24/7,
Yeah.
working. And that underlying piece really speaks to, and again, this will be leadership changing that culture and climate. And none of this means that we are doing less for our students at all. I don't mean like in the name of self-care, I'm not doing any work. It doesn't work that way, but we can absolutely find a different rhythm, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, you have to pick your spots when it's report
Yep.
card time or you have parent
Yeah.
teacher evenings or things like that. You're going to work long hours, and
Yep.
that's the way it is. But I think you're absolutely right about this. This, I don't know what it is this martyrdom slash
Yeah.
competition that folks have about how late they stayed or
Yeah.
how many hours, or the students they have to teach versus, oh,
Yeah.
and that phrase that you used earlier, I have to tell you, is probably one of my top three pet peeves when people say must be nice. The
Oh, my whole
dismissiveness.
skin crawls. I
Oh,
know.
mine too. I
Yep.
can't stand that. I think, yeah, it is nice. It is
Yeah.
nice that I'm leaving because you know what? Maybe I was a little more efficient with my time. And look, I don't mean to be dismissive of that, but I just think that sometimes the language we use, we have to be
Yes.
careful
Yeah.
about the
Yep.
message we're sending. And then
Yep.
principals need to be mindful of what they give their attention to. And the idea that teachers are finding balance and not at work all evening. Look, there are times, you're a new teacher, you do work longer
Yep.
hours, you're trying to
Yep.
figure out the profession, but in some cases we can inadvertently send this message,
Yeah.
and teachers feel a lot of pressure, and superintendents
Yeah.
do the same thing, right?
Yep.
What superintendents
Yep.
send messages about, principals will pay attention to, and what principals send messages about, teachers will pay attention to. So,
Yep.
and one more thing, the draft folder in most email programs is not a 2021 invention. That's been
Right.
around for a while. So
Yes.
the idea that we would spend a 2-day workshop teaching folks how to use the draft folder in their
Right?
email programs. Yeah. So
Yes.
no, Tina, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I think that you are just your expertise could not be more relevant given the stresses of the pandemic. And I mean, it's always been relevant, but given
Right.
what's happened over the last
Thank you.
18 to 20 months for sure. So I've got two
Cleveland for
questions.
saying that? Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I've got two questions left for you, and these are questions, as you know, that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. And here's the first one, and you can take this in any direction you want to, but educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah. This one's so easy. I think of it all the time. I'm worried sick about the adults in the building.
Yeah,
I'm not worried about, for the most part, I'm not worried about them taking care of their students. I'm worried about them. It circles back to, I've worked for Dr. Robert Marzano for years and years and years, and a lot of his research and work, he constantly goes back to the research to remind us that the absolute most direct correlation to student achievement is the teacher in the classroom. And
mhm,
what is I've always thought about that in thinking about instructional strategies. And the last few years, a different part of that sentence kind of lit up. It's the teacher, the human being.
yeah,
And that idea of we can take amazing strategies with high effect sizes and all the fancy stuff that has a pretty good chance of being successful. But if the person providing that strategy is totally depleted, worn out, burned out, exhausted, strategy is never going to have the impact that we want it to have on students. So what keeps me up at night is and the one we're going to lose the ones that are making the biggest difference, and we can't afford to lose them.
Right. Right. I don't always know what folks are going to say when I ask them that question, but I had a feeling I knew what you were going to say when I asked you that question. Okay, so last question, as you know, is about success and happiness. I ask everyone who comes on the podcast since day one about what their feelings are about the definition of success and happiness. So the question, of course, is if a random person stopped you on the street and just asked you, "What's your definition of success?" How would you answer them?
Yeah. Okay, you would think that I would have an answer. I listen to your podcast. I hear people's responses. I've thought about this, and I feel like it's kind of like a moving answer for me. So today, what I'm going to say, success is when you can fall asleep at night and feel like you made a difference.
Yeah.
And it can be teeny tiny. Maybe you made a difference to the stranger in the parking lot that you let take the spot. Maybe it was that you got to attend your child's soccer game. You got to be there. Maybe it's something in the classroom, but that to me, it's that connection back to the top of Maslow's hierarchy when we feel that we are connected to something outside of ourselves. To me, that feels like success these days.
Yeah. I think, so many folks talk about making a difference. And I think this is, a lot of ways what our profession is about
Yeah.
is making a difference, of course, with one another, but of course, primarily with the students that we serve on a daily basis. Listeners, you definitely should follow Tina on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Tina. Her handle is at @Boogren.
Yep.
That's THBOOGREN. You can hook up with the Self-Care for Educators page on Facebook, and certainly search Tina on LinkedIn as well. And I certainly have to recommend Tina's podcast, the Self-Care for Educators podcast. You really should subscribe to that. Short, quick episodes that are incredibly helpful. And you can find that also on the website, www.selfcareforeducators.com. I listened to Tina's podcast, really helpful tips. And certainly, Tina, you've brought a lot of the energy you put into the podcast to our interview today. And I certainly appreciate that. So I'll put links in the show notes. Just go there and everyone who's listening can connect with you in whatever realm they would like to. So
Yeah.
Tina, two things. Thanks so much for joining me today. And I want to just say on behalf of all educators, thank you for all you do in service of our profession and helping support educators all around the world.
Oh, my heart. Thank you. Thank you. That means the world to me. Thank you.